Hey, so I've been releasing content on protein for quite some time, and I've noticed a trend of people that seem to be really confused by how to think about protein. And it's understandable, especially in relationship to longevity and health, which is probably the majority of what people are interested in. That, and then of course getting into fitness and whatnot, which is related but a little bit to the side. So I wanted to highlight a few comments from people that I got and wanted to walk through how I think about protein based on the literature that I've seen up to now. So this first comment illustrates my point pretty well. I realize that it seems like nonsense. A person saying reduce protein, increase protein, reduce protein, increase protein. The point that this person, at least what I think that they're trying to make, is that one study says to reduce your protein, another study says that you should increase your protein. It's just the back and forth ping pong between increasing and decreasing your protein intake. The thing is that there are multiple reasons for why it feels that way. I think there is some truth to it, but I don't think that it's entirely accurate. The reason for that is, or one of the reasons is, certainly there's debate within the scientific field. So you're going to have some researchers that point to some data saying one thing, and then you're going to have researchers that point to data that says something else. So you're going to have a high protein camp and a low protein camp. The other problem is, and I think that's probably a minority of cases. I think ultimately scientists tend to, as we collect more data, start to come to a consensus on what is actually the truth. We just haven't gotten to that point in relation to longevity. So the research that I've looked at recently has been focused a lot more on longevity, and I still have a lot more to go through. But up to this point, another confusion that people have is when a person, an influencer, a health speaker, whatever you want to call them, a person who's supposed to be translating medical studies or nutrition studies into more understandable terms, what happens on social media is that people don't actually do a good job explaining what the researchers are saying. So if you were to pull the researchers together, I think that the ultimate result would be that people would end up agreeing that, oh, these researchers are studying this outcome, and these researchers are studying this other outcome, and therefore they have two different opinions on why high protein or low protein is necessarily positive or negative. And that's something that people don't seem to understand. It could be due to poor health communication, as in the people that are talking about the studies are not making that clear. But I also think that people that are in the space and trying to learn fail to make that distinction of, I am here learning about resistance training and building muscle, so therefore a higher protein diet is beneficial for that outcome, for building muscle. However, if you were to look at the longevity space, there's a good amount of data indicating that lower protein, for a variety of reasons. Again, I still need to look into a lot of that data, but I have read a good amount up to this point that lower protein tends to track with better longevity and just better longevity as a whole. And that can come from animal studies, but it can also come from some human data. So how do we reconcile the two? Well, we don't have to. That's kind of the point. So there isn't this conundrum of reduce protein, increase protein, reduce protein. It's about the outcomes, right? You have to understand that the low protein is beneficial for potentially longevity, and I'm saying potentially because I think there's a lot of data that still needs to come out. But what we do know for pretty certain, I don't think researchers really disagree too much on higher protein intakes tend to be beneficial if you are exercising a lot, if you're resistance training a lot, and your goal, your outcome of interest is to build muscle. Those are two different things. They may overlap in certain ways, right? So like a muscular person tends to live longer, but up to a point though, right? Because there's a point where you get so muscular, and obviously steroids could play a factor into that, that you start getting a signal of detrimental health, so lower longevity. But by and large, if you are muscular and fit and whatnot, and you're consuming a higher protein diet to recover from that fitness, that exercise, that training, then you typically live longer than the average person. So even if they were to consume a lower protein diet, so there's a lot of nuance there that needs to be had. And unfortunately, on social media, people just don't communicate that effectively. But again, I really think that the other half of it is people that they watch a video and they say, okay, so you're telling me high protein is good. Okay, high protein is good. And then it's just the stamp of approval. And then when they run into another video that says, well, wait, this other study says that we compared a high protein versus a low protein diet, and the low protein diet was beneficial against insulin resistance, or, whatever. I'm just making something up. Then the person's like, well, wait a second. Okay, so now I'll do low protein. Low protein is good. Okay, got it. And then they see another study. Well, high protein diets actually increase satiety. And they're like, wait a second. So now high protein's good. It's this ping pong, but that's none of these studies are talking about the same outcomes. So you have to create these folders where you think about and how you think about protein, and that applies to anything in science and in health in general. But you need to understand the first question you should ask yourself is, what do I want out of this? And you have to know that you can't have everything. You can't be the most longevity, but also have the biggest body, the most muscular body, the most powerful body, and also have the best insulin sensitivity, the best, like all these things. Like there's a lot of crossover, don't get me wrong. They're not completely independent of one another, but at the extremes, when you're talking about longevity, for example, there starts to be separation. And the studies indicate that there is reason for those separations. So it's just a point that I wanted to make in general. I think some of these other studies, other comments certainly get that across as well. So it's funny that this person says it's funny that nearly everyone tells us that protein is important for longevity to sell protein powders. Well, the thing is, I'm not sure they're actually saying that. First of all, okay, I'll make an argument both ways. So one argument is most of the longevity researchers actually don't tell us that. That may be what you're being told on social media and whatnot by science communicators or health communicators. I'll even put it down a rung lower, social media communicators, influencers, that protein is important for longevity. But that's not what a lot of researchers say. So it's just ignored research, or it's just poorly communicated to sell their protein powders. Okay, so now you're talking about influencers, right? Somehow I'm not surprised that this isn't the simple truth. And this person is talking about one of the videos that I released where a low protein diet was linked to greater longevity, better fat, like lower fat mass, better liver tissue health, and a bunch of different metrics, and increased metabolism and things of that nature. So I'm not going to relitigate that here. But then the other argument is, well, it tells us that protein is important for longevity, and you could make an argument that it is relative to a person who is eating a Western American diet, like a standard American diet. If that's the case, like if you're comparing against a standard American diet, then I think a high protein diet, now basically almost as high as you want to go, is going to be better than a standard American diet, because you're starting to rob some of these other nutrients that are causing weight gain, insulin resistance, all this stuff. So if you're consuming a lot of saturated fat and sugars and ultra processed foods, and you're replacing that with a higher protein diet, well, your health typically gets better. So there is a positive argument to be had for consuming more proteins in that regard. But if you're trying to optimize like a biohacker to the extremes, then that's where the same rules that applied in that scenario, again, keep in mind how isolated and how contextual that scenario is. Does that necessarily apply to a person that's trying to get every possible percentage benefit out of their life? Probably not. And that's where we start to get that discordance. The final comment that I wanted to point out is kind of broaden this from protein and to look at the science communication as a whole, which I alluded to. So this person says, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but sure is a lot of BS going on in the science, quote unquote, science world. Sugar is healthier than fat. No, fat is healthier than sugar. Avoid saturated fat. No, saturated fat is good for you. Eat plenty of protein. No, eat only the bare minimum of protein. Meat is bad for you. No, meat is good for you, and on and on. And that's true. That's absolutely true. There's so much of this miscommunication that goes out there. To be honest with you, I think that the number of truly science-based communicators that are out there is quite low. I think the vast majority, and I'm not exaggerating, the vast majority of the people that are communicating quote unquote science, to use this quote unquote science, are not truly science-based communicators. They may talk about, this study, but what you don't realize, for me as a person who is in the scientific field, is that they're ignoring like 90 other studies that would refute this one study. So they may seem like they're a science-based communicator, but they're actually just, to me, misleading the public. So there's a lot of that. There's a ton of that going on. So it's entirely understandable that you'd have like sugar is healthier than fat. No, fat is healthier than sugar. You have this back and forth, and you have this ping pong back and forth. And I think that there's a certain like level of BS radar that you can get from just paying attention to, do they only cover positives related to fat? Do they only cover positives related to sugar? Because I can promise you there's literature on both, but there's nuances, right? Like sugar may be better. So for example, sugar would be really good. I'm not talking about like sugar. I'm talking about like carbohydrates, for example, but even sugar, like glucose, fructose, in small amounts. If you were to consume that, let's say that before an exercise session, then you might see improvements in your exercise performance because your body doesn't have to rely on glycogen if it's a long exercise session. On the other hand, if you're going to consume fats, maybe you have high blood sugar levels and you need to rapidly reduce your blood sugar levels, then you would maybe want to consume more fats to cut out some of those carbs. So you realize there's so much context there, and people just that are on social media just don't acknowledge that context. So they just give you these statements of, no, you should do this. And then you'll notice a lot of it, there's a through line of they just continuously to beat on this one point, but they never acknowledge any of the other research that's constantly coming out saying other things that are not necessarily contradictory, but they offer other perspective or they offer context that is just completely ignored when just focusing on that. So if you're only focused on plant-based content, or you're only focused on ketogenic diets, that's the only thing that you cover, to me, like that offers a significant signal that a person is biased focusing on only those things. So it's kind of broader, speaking about like how things are being talked about. And then the other point here is, this person says, eat responsibly and exercise regularly, moderation in all. Yeah, I completely agree. I think for the vast majority of people, just eat just a moderate diet of everything. Make sure that you're not, gaining weight, exercising a few times per week. It's just like that's going to do 80% of the heavy lifting. And then from there, you can really delve into those details. But again, if you're going to delve into the details, you should also be aware that you're going to be running into some of these roadblocks, these context-related roadblocks that require a little bit more nuance and thoughtfulness and thinking about, okay, what do I want out of my body? If I am not satisfied with just exercising a little bit more or eating in moderation, and I really want to push, like I want to be a really good marathon runner, for example, then most likely I'm going to start doing things like carb cycling. I'm going to start using concepts like supercompensation. It's just like, the point is, you start getting grittier and grittier right into those details, and it's just stuff that's just not communicated effectively. So anyway, I just wanted to quick mention that there isn't as much of a protein paradox as it seems. It's just that the people that are communicating and the people that are being communicated to are just not applying these levels of nuance to put protein and how to think about protein in their respective folders. Like the recommendations for protein for somebody who's trying to build muscle are completely different from the protein recommendations for somebody who's trying to absolutely squeeze every morsel of life out of their body from a longevity perspective. Again, there's going to be a little bit of overlap, but as they get further and further into the extremes, they start to split from one another a lot more. So just something to consider. I encourage you always to, consider the nuance. Consider that the study is limited to what that study is studying. It is not going to extend automatically to a million other situations. For that, you need individual studies to get you closer to that overall viewpoint. Okay, thanks for hanging out. I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.